If it has anything to do with dilapidated technology, rusty droids, or strange creatures, chances are it'll be right up my alley. And in my last video, I began combining those elements in a series of builds. And today we're returning with a rickety tower cobbled together from old world tech. This is Gamey Builds, and welcome to Beyond the Blight. The original idea for this build was pretty simple. A cozy cottage carved from the innards of a rusty dumpster. But the end result strayed so far from this concept that you'd think J.J. Abrams was in charge, but that's typically what happens with my original creations, and I've learned not to fight it. To create the dumpster, I used 1mm chipboard. I searched high and low for a free dumpster template and couldn't uncover any, and since there was no way I was paying for a trash receptacle, I'm just winging it here, cutting out rectangles for the front and back, then slicing a bit off the side panels for the appropriate slope. Because my forethought skills have leveled up a notch or two after doing so many of these projects, I realized that cutting window and door holes into the panels would be much easier before they were all glued together. You'd be correct in thinking that a dumpster would make a rather cramped dwelling for the average size human, but part of the fun of this particular video will be seeing what answers you all come up with to the question, who or what lives in this structure? A dwarven race of humans? A diminutive tribe of droids? Or maybe...
What is this? A center for ants?
I'm using this tofu container for the dumpster's swinging plastic cover. I thought these grooves would work pretty well for a dumpster lid of this scale, and also the plastic was soft and pliable. I liked how the tofu plastic was super easy to cut, then glue, then sand, but mostly I just liked it because of those sweet grooves. I then took the lids and spray painted them black as a primer coat. Oh, and here are some chunky wheels made from erasers that are about to get grubbed up and downright stanky in just a moment. Before painting the dumpster bunker, I coated it in Mod Podge to seal everything. I then painted and added rust texture by mixing baking soda with burnt sienna craft paint. So as the next few clips roll by, I'd like to share a bit of the lore I'm developing for this world. I'm calling the series of builds Beyond the Blight, a reference to a mysterious fungus of unknown origin that appeared on this planet 4 decades prior to the structure in this build, and 2 centuries before the previous one. It's important to establish a timeline for these events because as we move from one era to the next, the ecology and technology will vary greatly. The fungus known colloquially as the Blight spread insatiably over the surface of this planet, altering the ecosystem and turning vast swaths of land into decaying fungal wastelands. While not directly fatal to the human population, the thick haze of airborne spores made life difficult, and as rumors spread of it being to blame for genetic defects, the majority of the human population was driven underground. They became known as the Unders. The Overs, those who clung to their old lives above ground, were forced to adapt, utilizing drones and robots to help them eke out a meager existence. Their robots were eventually enhanced with advanced forms of AI, affording them the processes of basic reasoning, imitation, and at times what some might classify as ingenuity. 4 decades into the Blight, pockets of forested land still exist, spared the fungal infection by reasons still unknown. With the dumpster exterior painted, I then sponged on some flat black to tone down the glossy finish of the lids. Then it was on to the interior. The floors and door were made from balsa wood, detailed with this X-Acto knife, and some additional texture was added with this pushpin. After a few brown washes, I painted the door red and even went so far as to add a tiny stone hearth and wood-burning stove, even though I was pretty sure none of this would be visible in the finished product. The interior was painted dark red, and then it was on to the windows. You might recognize this dollar store grease screen from way back in my first video when I built my pod racer. A light dusting of baking soda helped to greatly speed up the drying time, a trick that I really wished I'd known earlier. For the door window, I used a piece of clear plastic, and instead of supergluing it, which has a weird frosting effect when used on clear plastic, I used UV resin as glue, and then I applied frosted glass effect. The floor was then glued in, then the door, and then some shelves and other decorations. But this is where I really started having second thoughts about my original idea. The dumpster, while cool, would feel pretty insignificant and uninteresting by itself. Back to the drawing board, where I thought it might be interesting if the dumpster hideout were mobile and had multiple stories. I started this new track by starting on 2 new tracks, these tank-like tracks, which were made with the same technique seen in my Wall-E build. 2 strips of chipboard, scribed with tons of parallel lines, then bent into shape. After gluing the ends together, it was just a matter of gluing a whole bunch of mechanical-looking junk into the treads, in this case, a baby bottle party favors. I then sliced up a rubber eraser to fill this negative space in the treads. This was totally measured for and 100% intentional and not simply a random discovery I made after raking through my junk drawers. It was also my plan all along for these Gundam shoulder bits to fit in this exact spot, and ditto for these snipped USB cables, greeblies, etc, etc. In keeping with the theme of giant storage units being repurposed for cramped dwellings, the second tier of the tower is an airline's baggage carrier. You know, those things you see zipping around the airport, protecting your luggage from the baggage handlers, I imagine. Because these are supposed to be habitable dwellings, they've been fitted with pipes and wires for utilities, which I'm replicating with Q-tip bits, more party favors, guitar string, and toy bits. After just a bit more detailing with pipes, I constructed a balcony railing for the dumpster dweller up top with toothpicks and OCD. True story, you can actually hear me holding my breath between each placed stick in the original audio, followed by heavy gasps of air, but I can't play it because there's copyrighted music in the background. Also, for an insulated pipe, I used this bent metal rod, then slipped a textured USB cable casing over it in segments. While dumpster diving over the weekend, I discovered this little gem, corrugated paper, which I had not previously had the pleasure of working with, in spite of seeing it used multiple times in Studson's amazing projects. It did not disappoint. This is way better than making my own out of tinfoil. The final tier was more of the same, 1mm chipboard cut up to vaguely resemble the control booth of a crane, or something. I then covered the ceiling in roughshod planks of popsicle sticks, and my wife likes Tic Tacs, so she's always giving me the used containers, so I thought I'd incorporate the minty receptacles into this build as little engine container things. And here's some more corrugated paper to simulate scrappy metal panels on the outside walls, some bits of wire coiled around other wire for rigid cables, and then honestly just a whole lot of junk glued here and there. You like toothpicks? Check. You like random, potentially toxic laptop components? Bam! Got them in spades. You like pieces from a broken keyboard? Oh, we so got that. This laptop is from like 2005. Think this wire is coated in lead? Probably, definitely yes, but we're adding it. This thing is gonna sit on my shelf when it's done and just slowly irradiate my whole workspace until I'm sterile. And what post-apocalyptic build would be complete without tons of rivets? I'm making mine from this hole-punched Kleenex box. More handrails, and this one was awesomely already bent into this shape by the keyboard manufacturers whose product I just destroyed. Thanks for the tiny handrail, hardworking engineers. Well, this looked almost decent at this point, but the backside was admittedly boring, so I decided to make a fourth unit that would cling like an afterthought to the rest of the structure. Another nice thing about this particular part was that it would allow me to sneak in a battery unit for the LEDs. I'd kind of left that option on the table through the whole build, and this was just the two birds, one stone solution that sealed the deal. For reasons I can't explain, I thought this mobile rust colony should also have its own water source, so I decided to perch a tiny water tank on its roof, made from a tiny bottle, a paper cone, and lots of trapezoidal cardstock. I then made some metal seams for the tank with paper and built a tiny wood platform for the tank. After some final details were added to represent sprouts, and tubes, and nozzles, I made the legs and base of the platform, and bam! We are ready to prime. I went for a dark brown base this time, since that would be the least problematic color to show through under a thin layer of paint. The treads got covered in black first, and then were dry brushed in a dark silver. The usual, lots of baking soda mixed with brown paint, and then green flocking was sprinkled on. Next came the painting, weathering, and rusting. And while I really enjoy actually doing this step of the process, admittedly watching the footage is a little less than riveting, so I'm combining some of these clips for brevity's sake. I thought I'd mention that I just launched a Patreon page, by the way. It's probably a little premature, given how few videos I've got up at the moment and how new I am to this hobby in general, but building cool little models and dioramas out of household junk is something I'm really enjoying, and I'd love to do more of. And with slightly better supplies, like an airbrush that doesn't clog on me every 3 minutes, and maybe some proper lights for filming these projects, things could get a lot better. So, if you're interested in getting some of the inside scoop on my projects before the build videos go live here on YouTube, consider hopping on over and checking it out. But even if you don't go through all that trouble, I greatly appreciate you all watching, liking, and commenting on these videos. Now, those little things really do add up to help this channel to grow and get recommended to others who might enjoy watching me fumble aimlessly through these creations. Also, before I forget, thanks to Fanro for the suggestion on my previous build of calling the bird a giant jogari. The name instantly caught on with several other users mentioning it in their comments, so it has officially been added to the Beyond the Blight lexicon. With the painting and weathering done, I decided to try something new, decals. These aren't quite to the standard of transfer decals or water slide decals. Instead, these were simply printed at home on standard printer paper, sliced up and affixed with watered down white glue. I weathered them by scraping them with the tip of my X-Acto blade while they were still wet, and then applied a brown wash to match the look of the structure. With all the parts detailed, decaled, and dusted, I donned the Duracells, then threaded the string lights through these holes I drilled in the tower. Then it was time to glue everything together. And remember what I said about my forethought abilities leveling up? Well, scratch that, because I clearly hadn't thought through this, how to add this frosted windshield. Eventually I just left the gaps on the edges and made this rusty metal grating to cover it all up. Next, this little spool of wire became a winch cable, while this jewelry fastener became a winch hook. Finally, I thought the tower would look a lot more functional if some smoke were billowing up from this pipe. For the smoke column, I glued some Q-tips together, wrapped them in loose cotton, and airbrushed on some black for a smoky finish. With the tower out of the way, it was time to get working on the most frustrating part of this build by far, the trees. Here's a step-by-step guide on how to replicate my misery. Step 1. Rush to Home Depot on a Sunday night right before close and run full speed to the very back corner of the store to buy some wooden dowels. Spend an unnecessary amount of time figuring out you only need 2 so that the cashier can give you an extra salty look when you check out. Step 2. Bring the dowels home and create bark-like grooves in the wood with a Dremel because you were dumb and bought pine instead of much softer balsa, which will make this whole project a lot harder. Step 3. Also due to not using balsa wood, give yourself finger cramps by poking numerous holes into the hard wood. Be sure to just make this exact number of holes, which is way too few, so that you have to come back later when most of the branches are added and awkwardly jam in some more. Step 4. Smack yourself in the forehead when you realize you haven't yet made the tip of your tree pointy, so all you have is a weird impaled telephone pole. Then, because conifers are conical, trim away the branches as needed. 5. Make the needles. You'll need a disposable cup, twine, green paint, and a soundproof room to scream in at the top of your lungs every couple of hours from here on out. Step 6. Once dry, snip all that twine into 5mm lengths. Be sure not to do enough of this the first time, so you'll have to repeatedly revisit this step, resulting in a workspace filled with cups of dye and twine in various stages of drying. Step 7. Get yelled at by your wife for making the aforementioned mess. Step 8. Once you've finally got enough fibers about a week after you started, sift them all carefully through a sifter purchased specifically for this purpose, or use the kitchen sifter and repeat step 7. Step 9. Spray the trees brown. Step 10. To get the needles to stick to the branches, spray the trees with aerosol adhesive, though it won't work very well, so you'll need to try everything from watered down PVA glue to hairspray. Maybe something will eventually work. Step 11. Act like the reason you did these needles the hard way was for the subtle variation in color, until your wife points out that most pine trees are uniformly colored and that your homemade needles are too light anyways, so end up using the manufactured variety after all. Step number 12. If you're dozing off from a lack of sleep due to this lengthy process, be sure to touch the metal screen on your static applicator every couple of minutes for a high voltage pick-me-up. No more daytime drowsies. Step 13. Enjoy your trees and hope you never have to repeat this arduous arboreal agony. On to the base, which was made from this cheap decorative frame. I find myself returning a lot to these frames, which I like because of their elevation, the fact that they give you a little hollow space beneath to hide mistakes, and also their price. The idea here is to have the tower trudging slowly along a dirt path covered on both sides by a slight elevation covered in trees and rocks. After tracing out the path's shape, I used foam core for the sides of the road. After texturing the ground with my Dremel, I began crafting rocks out of foam. I wanted to retain some of the rough rock-like texture, so I didn't use the knife for everything, instead chipping and scraping and breaking off pieces by hand. By sheer will, I slapped that rock into place. Then hit everything with brown. For a tiny rocky texture, I glued down this beach sand and painted. Once the base coat on the rocks was done, I sponged on this warm gray. I'm using the sponge method a lot in this build to avoid visible brush strokes, though for some of the smaller nooks and crannies, a small brush is inevitable. I also dry brushed on some burnt sienna and even some green just for color variation in preparation for the grass. And don't you just love washes? They really bring out the detail and tie the colors together, especially when contrasted by a dry brush highlight, in this case the original stone color mixed with white. To add the grass, I applied some watered down white glue, aka PVA glue, then sprinkled on the leftover flecks I'd made previously for the pine needles. As you can see, the material doesn't really respond much to static electricity, unlike my body. After dusting off the excess dried grass, I added flock to just the northern side of the rocks to simulate moss. Then, after drilling holes in the wooden base, I hot glued in my pine trees. Last but not least, a wooden plank frame for the base to match my last build. And And that was that. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this build. I'm really eager to keep exploring this world of strange contraptions and robotics. So if this series is getting your creative juices flowing like it is mine, let me know in the comments what other builds you think might fit into this world. And as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to share your thoughts on what kind of creatures might be living in this tower and what sort of purpose the tower serves. As always, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, this is Gamey Builds. Over and out.